How did a 16-year-old kid turn $12 into a cattle empire worth over $700 million? How did one ranch come to own its own oil fields, lakes, and enough land to stretch across 6 Texas counties without ever being split apart? And how did a bitter family feud nearly destroy it all, only to be saved by one of the most dramatic ranch sales in American history? This isn't just another Texas ranch. This is the Waggoner Ranch, where wild animals, cattle, oil wells, quarter horses, Comanche chiefs, and high-stakes deals all collide in one incredible, true story. To find out how it all happened, watch this video till the end. And don't forget to subscribe to Digital Papyrus for more epic stories from the American West. Our story begins in the wild Texas frontier of the 1840s and 1850s. Daniel Dan Waggoner, born in 1828, moved west with his family during the era when North Texas was still open range and largely untamed. In 1849, at just 21 years old, Dan struck out to start his own cattle operation, the humble beginnings of what would become the Waggoner Ranch. At that time, Texas had only recently joined the Union, and neighboring Oklahoma was still Indian territory. The frontier was lawless and unforgiving. Settlers faced threats from hostile Comanche and Kiowa tribes, and cattle thieves prowled the range. Dan Waggoner learned the cattle business from his father in these rough conditions, and after his father's death in 1849, he was determined to succeed on his own. In 1853, Dan made his first land claim, 160 acres on Cattle Creek near Decatur, Texas. That date, 1853, is carved in stone at the ranch's main entrance today as the official founding of Waggoner Ranch. Dan's early ranch was modest, but the open range offered endless opportunity. He soon added 320 more acres in 1856 and steadily kept expanding. The young rancher often drove cattle further west as new lands opened for settlement. By the late 1850s, he and a 15-year-old enslaved ranch hand trailed a herd of 242 longhorn cattle and a handful of horses to Wise County, Texas. A risky venture given the constant danger of Indian raids and bandits at that time. But these risks were the price of building a cattle empire on the frontier. Through the 1860s, Dan Waggoner weathered the tumult of the Civil War era and continued raising cattle. It wasn't easy. The frontier was a frontier area frequented by hostile Indians and marauding cattle thieves. But Dan's grit and savvy saw him through. After the Civil War, demand for beef in the North fueled the great cattle drive era. Dan seized the opportunity of booming cattle markets and vast open land. He moved his herds gradually westward, following fresh grass and water. By the 1870s, he had pushed out toward the Red River region near present-day Vernon, Texas, establishing camps along creeks like Beaver Creek and staking out new ranges, as Native American presence receded and settlers poured in. Dan Waggoner was not formally educated, but he proved to be a shrewd businessman and land baron. He reinvested his cattle profits into more land at every turn. He even branched out beyond ranching. His investments came to include 5 banks, 3 cottonseed oil mills, and a coal company, enterprises that both supported the ranch and added to his wealth. By the late 19th century, Dan Waggoner had truly laid the foundations of a ranching empire. Dan Waggoner had one son, William Thomas Waggoner, born in 1852 and known simply as Tom or W.T. Waggoner. From a young age, Tom grew up in the saddle, learning every facet of ranch life from his father. Dan was determined to prepare his son to help run and eventually lead the growing ranch. The moment of testing came in 1869, when Tom was just 16 years old. Dan entrusted his teenage son with 5,000 head of wild longhorn steers and a crew of cowboys, and sent him on a cattle drive over 400 miles north to the railheads in Kansas. To finance the drive, Dan gave Tom only $12 in cash,
50 horses, all of them sore-backed and worn out, and his blessing. It was an almost inconceivable responsibility for a teenager, guiding a massive herd across Indian Territory, what is now Oklahoma, at a time when that land was still home to the Comanche and other tribes. Is that the sort of chore you'd give your 17-year-old son? Dan Waggoner did, and young Tom Waggoner rose to the challenge. Amazingly, Tom delivered the herd safely to market in Abilene, Kansas, and sold the cattle for a huge profit. He returned to Texas with $55,000 in gold, a fortune in those days, worth about $1.2 million in today's money. Turning $12 into $55,000 in one cattle drive became legendary in ranching lore. That profit became the seed capital for the Waggoner Empire and proved Tom's mettle. By 1870, the father and son had formalized their partnership as D. Waggoner and Son, signaling that Tom, not yet even 18, was now a full partner in the growing ranch enterprise. Dan had effectively handed the reins to his capable son. As one account noted, Tom became a partner at 17, and by age 27, he had full reins of the Waggoner cattle empire. Tom himself later quipped about that formative drive. "There I was with more than 5,000 big, wild steers, 50 sore-backed horses, $12, and 16 years of my life." The experience forged in him an unshakable confidence and ambition. From his teen years, Tom Waggoner was exceptionally driven. He reportedly declared that his goal was to run the most cattle, breed the best horses, and work harder than anyone. Indeed, Tom's energy and vision would fuel the ranch's explosive growth in the coming decades. As open-range ranching peaked in the 1870s and 1880s, the Waggoners kept expanding their land holdings across North Texas. Dan and Tom aggressively bought or leased land in multiple counties to give their herds room to graze. By the 1880s, their domains stretched westward into the Panhandle Plains, south toward Archer and Baylor counties, and north to the Red River. They established large ranch divisions and line camps to manage far-flung herds. During this era, barbed wire was introduced, and the open range began to close up. The Waggoners, like other great Texas ranchers, fenced their spreads to protect their cattle and water sources. Conflicts arose with free-range herders, but the age of the big fenced ranches had arrived. The Waggoner Ranch's perimeter eventually enclosed over 500,000 contiguous acres, hence the famed title, "largest ranch under one fence." With such size came challenges. Fence cutters, rustlers, and occasional clashes with remaining Comanche groups were realities. Dan and Tom joined forces with fellow cattle barons to tackle these threats head-on. In 1877, the Waggoners met with legendary ranchers like Burke Burnett of the 666 Ranch, Colonel C.C. Slaughter, and J.A. Ranch's Jim Loving in Graham, Texas, and together they founded what is today the Texas and Southwestern Cattle Raisers Association, TSCRA. This organization created a united front against cattle theft, hiring range detectives and lobbying for law and order, and it remains a cornerstone of Texas ranching to this day. By the turn of the century, the Waggoner operation was truly massive. Dan Waggoner had become one of the biggest landowners in Texas. When Dan Waggoner passed away in 1902, the inventory of his estate was astonishing. About 80,000 head of cattle and 525,000 acres of owned land, plus leases on another 100,000 acres in Indian Territory, Oklahoma. In terms of land under control, the Waggoner outfit was running cattle on roughly 625,000 acres at the time of Dan's death, more than 970 square miles of range. Dan died while on a trip to Colorado, and his death marked the end of an era. But by then, his life's work was in capable hands. Tom Waggoner inherited the entire ranch enterprise in 1902, becoming sole owner and patriarch at age 50. He would soon take the Waggoner Ranch to even greater heights, but also face new kinds of challenges.
Before moving forward, let's talk about the Waggoner Ranch's brand, a detail beloved by ranching enthusiasts. Every great Texas ranch has a distinctive brand, and for the Waggoners, it was the 3 Ds. In the early years, Dan Waggoner branded his cattle with a reversed triple D symbol, 3 intertwined letter Ds, to mark his herd. The Waggoner 3D brand, sometimes called the DDD brand, became one of the oldest and most famous brands in Texas, reportedly in use since 1849. There's even a bit of lore about how it originated. Some say W.T. designed a single D brand that a blacksmith misread upside down and stamped as 3Ds, while others suggest Dan added extra Ds to make the brand harder for rustlers to alter. Whatever the case, the triple D mark was long the Waggoner trademark. Interestingly, as the value of cattle hides rose in the late 1800s, the Waggoners decided to simplify the brand to a single reverse D on the animal so as not to damage so much of the hide with a large brand. Despite this practical change, the 3D brand remained the symbolic identity of the ranch. To this day, the historic reversed D/triple D logo is synonymous with the Waggoner Ranch legacy. It represents continuity, an unbroken line of ownership and quality dating back to the very dawn of Texas ranching. As the 20th century dawned, Tom oversaw a ranch that was already legendary for cattle. But an unexpected discovery would add a second fortune to the Waggoner legacy: oil. In 1902, just months after Tom took full control, the family was drilling for water on the ranch when they struck something else entirely: oil oozing up from the hole. At the time, this was more annoyance than asset. Early 1900s ranchers prized water above all, and crude oil was a messy distraction. In fact, Tom was initially disgusted by the oil find, seeing it as a nuisance since what he wanted was a reliable water well. Little did he know this black gold would revolutionize the ranch's fortunes. Within a few years, as the automobile age arrived and demand for petroleum exploded, Tom changed his tune about oil. By the 1910s, he embraced the opportunity and even built the Waggoner refinery on the ranch to process their crude. The Waggoner Ranch became a significant regional oil producer. They integrated oil production seamlessly into ranch operations. In fact, during the early oil boom, the Waggoners painted their brand logo on railroad tank cars and oil storage tanks just as they did on cattle, literally branding the oil business as part of the ranch. The Waggoner oil field was prolific and played a key role in the rise of Texaco, the Texas company, in its early years. By the 1930s, cowboy humorist Will Rogers visited the ranch and was struck by how oil wells and cattle coexisted on the range. Rogers quipped that the Waggoner family had an oil well for every cow on their land. It was a humorous exaggeration, but not by much. Even today, the ranch has roughly 1,200 active oil wells pumping away amidst the pastures. Those wells produce on the order of 35,000 to 41,000 barrels of oil each month, making oil a co-equal revenue stream alongside cattle ranching. In essence, the Waggoners struck oil by accident, but they had the foresight to turn it into a long-lasting boom. The oil income helped sustain the ranch through lean times and allowed for modernization and expansion when many other ranches struggled. Decades later, observers would joke that there is no groundwater on Waggoner Ranch, only oil, reflecting the legendary tale of hitting oil instead of water. While not literally true, the ranch does have water sources. The saying highlights how entwined petroleum and ranching became in the Waggoner story. Cattle may have been king for the Waggoners, but horses were a passion. Tom in particular loved fine horses and recognized their importance to ranch success. Remember those sore-backed horses he had on that 1869 cattle drive? Tom swore he would always have good ones thereafter. He developed a top-quality remuda, ranch horse herd, early on, breeding hardy ranch horses to carry his cowboys. Over time, the Waggoner horse program became one of the best in the nation. So much so that Tom Waggoner was a founding member of the American Quarter Horse Association in 1940, reflecting the family's influential role in developing the quarter horse breed. Several Waggoners shared this equine enthusiasm. The family kept stables of fine thoroughbreds for racing, as well as stock horses for ranch work. In the late 1920s,
Tom made a bold move to put Texas on the horse racing map. He built Arlington Downs, a state-of-the-art racetrack on his farm near Fort Worth. Completed in 1929 at a cost of $3 million, an extravagant sum at the time, Arlington Downs featured a 6,000-seat grandstand and luxurious facilities. Tom was an ardent supporter of legalized pari-mutuel betting, and indeed, Texas briefly legalized horse racing in 1933. Arlington Downs had a short heyday, but sadly Tom died in 1934, and just a few years later, in 1937, Texas repealed the betting law. The glamorous track was eventually sold and later demolished, ending that chapter. Still, Tom had lived to see his dream of Texas horse racing come alive, if only for a moment. Back on the ranch, the quarter horse breeding program truly flourished under Tom's son, E. Paul Waggoner. E. Paul took charge of the horse division and poured his energy into producing outstanding working and show horses. The Waggoner Ranch became renowned in quarter horse circles. They bred horses that could excel in cutting, ranch work, and in the show arena. But above all, they were cow horses, bred for cattle work and athleticism. The most famous horse to come out of Waggoner Ranch was Poco Bueno, a brown stallion foaled in 1944 whose name means pretty good in Spanish, a humble name that proved to be an understatement. Poco Bueno, trained as a cutting horse, rose to dominate the quarter horse world in the 1940s and 50s. He became a Hall of Fame stallion, inducted in 1990, and sired 405 registered foals, including dozens of champions. He was even reputed to be the first quarter horse ever insured for $100,000 due to his high value. When Poco Bueno died in 1969, the Waggoners honored him with a Texas-sized tribute. They buried the great stallion standing upright near the entrance on Highway 283 and erected a 4-ton granite marker engraved with his image and the words "Champion" and "Sire of Champions." This gravesite remains a landmark, a reminder of how important horses are to the identity of the Waggoner Ranch. In fact, the ranch's horse breeding operation was so respected that the American Quarter Horse Association honored Waggoner Ranch with the Best of the Remuda Award, recognizing its exceptional stock of working horses. Today, the Waggoner horse legacy continues robustly. The horse division, known as the Whiteface Division, is a modern state-of-the-art breeding and training facility on the ranch. The ranch maintains a band of top-quality quarter horse broodmares and stallions, many carrying the bloodline of Poco Bueno and other famed sires. They use advanced techniques like artificial insemination and embryo transfer to improve the stock. The horses are primarily raised for ranch work. Every cowboy on the Waggoner rides a ranch-bred quarter horse, but surplus horses and special bloodstock are also sold to the public via private sales and auctions. At any given time, the ranch runs several hundred horses. One source noted about 500 horses on the ranch as of the 2010s. From flashy cutting champions to sturdy cow ponies, the Waggoner horses are known for their athleticism and cow sense, carrying forward a heritage that began with Tom's insistence on having only the best mounts for his outfit. Operating a ranch of this magnitude wasn't without tremendous challenges, especially in the early days. The Waggoner Ranch had to navigate frontier conflicts, environmental extremes, and economic swings that could have spelled doom for a less tenacious outfit. One of the earliest trials came from the Comanche and other plains tribes who fiercely protected their lands. The Waggoner Range in the 1860s and 70s pressed into areas that Comanche once dominated. There are accounts of Indian raids threatening the Waggoner herds and camps, as happened to many Texas ranchers of that era. The Waggoners, like their neighbors, coped by organizing community defenses and establishing communication networks, hence the formation of the Cattle Raisers Association in 1877 to collectively address theft and raids. By the late 1870s, the Comanche had been forced onto reservations, easing that particular threat. But another challenge emerged: the end of the open range. When barbed wire fencing proliferated, range wars and fencing disputes broke out across Texas. Large outfits like Waggoner Ranch that fenced early were sometimes targeted by fence cutters, smaller farmers and stockmen angry at lost access.
The Waggoners were involved in these tensions, but managed to hold their domain together. They also faced conflict over grazing land beyond Texas. In the early 1900s, Tom and other Texas cattlemen negotiated leases in Oklahoma's Big Pasture, a huge tract of grassland in former Comanche territory, to extend their grazing. Tom even struck a deal with the famous Comanche chief Quanah Parker to lease that range. For a time, Waggoner cattle peacefully grazed the Big Pasture, but political pressure mounted to terminate these leases since that land was supposed to benefit the Indians, not out-of-state ranchers. The Waggoners and their allies fought to keep the lease. In a bit of theater, Quanah Parker invited President Theodore Roosevelt out to the Big Pasture for a well-publicized wolf hunt in 1905, hoping to win support. Roosevelt had a grand time hunting wolves on horseback with the Comanche chief. It was even said to be a highlight of his trip, but ultimately it did not sway policy. The government closed the Big Pasture to Texas cattlemen, and Tom lost that vast leased range. Losing the Big Pasture was a rare defeat for Waggoner Ranch, but Tom took it in stride and refocused on lands within Texas. This episode illustrates the kind of resourcefulness and bold deals the Waggoners were willing to pursue, as well as their ability to adapt when plans went awry. Nature itself has tested the Waggoner Ranch time and again. North Texas is cattle country, but it is not without climatic hardships, from periodic droughts to bitter winter storms. During the 1880s and 1990s, severe blizzards and droughts struck the Great Plains, devastating many ranches. The Waggoners' widespread lands gave them an advantage. If one area was dry, another might have grass, so they could move cattle as needed. Moreover, after the turn of the century, Tom invested in water infrastructure that proved critical. He partnered in the creation of Lake Kemp and Lake Diversion on the ranch in the early 1920s, large reservoirs built on the Wichita River to supply water for both irrigation and nearby towns. These lakes meant the ranch had reliable surface water even when rainfall was scarce. In later years, thousands of earthen stock tanks, or ponds, were also built across the property to catch rainwater, ensuring cattle never have to roam far for a drink. The commitment to water management helped the Waggoner Ranch survive the Dust Bowl drought of the 1930s and the severe drought of the 1950s that crippled many Texas ranches. While others sold out or went bankrupt, the Waggoner Ranch kept its herds watered and intact, partly thanks to these foresighted water projects. The Great Depression of the 1930s was another major challenge. Cattle prices collapsed nationwide. The Waggoners, however, had a buffer. Their oil income was booming in those years, which helped offset losses in the cattle market. As noted earlier, Tom died in 1934, in the depth of the Depression. The ranch he left behind was financially stable due to its diversified businesses: cattle, oil, farming, horses, and thus it weathered the 1930s better than most. In summary, the Waggoner Ranch overcame frontier-era violence, changing laws and land policies, harsh weather, and economic busts through a combination of tenacity, innovation, and diversification. They were never afraid to try new ventures, be it oil drilling, horse racing, or new cattle breeds, to keep the ranch profitable. They fought for their interests, forming associations, lobbying politicians, even inviting presidents to go hunting, and were not above changing course when needed. Each challenge met and conquered only added to the ranch's legendary status.
While external challenges abounded, perhaps the fiercest battles were within the Waggoner family itself. As is often the case with great family fortunes, disagreements and rivalries emerged among the heirs of Dan and Tom Waggoner, threatening the very survival of the ranch as a single entity. The saga of Waggoner family disputes is a dramatic tale spanning the 20th century, full of courtroom showdowns and bitter feuding, but ultimately, it ended with the preservation of the ranch intact. It began with Tom's children. Tom married Ella Housel in 1877, and they had 5 children, 3 of whom survived to adulthood: Electra Waggoner, Guy Waggoner, and E. Paul Waggoner. Tom was a devoted father and wanted to instill ranching sense in his kids. By the early 1900s, the Waggoner Ranch had ballooned to over 1 million acres, including leased land, across 6 counties. Managing such an empire was a lot for one man, so in 1909, Tom attempted a generous experiment. He divided the ranch into 4 parts. He kept the largest section, the Whiteface Division on the east side, for himself, and gave each of his 3 children one of the other big divisions, roughly 85,000 acres apiece, as a Christmas gift. The divisions were even given distinct names: Zacawista, Four Corners, and Santa Rosa, and each child was meant to take charge of their section. Tom's hope was that his son and daughters would learn the ropes and continue the ranching tradition on their own portions of land. Unfortunately, that plan didn't work out as he envisioned. Managing a huge ranch takes aptitude and interest that his heirs, it turned out, lacked. According to Texas lore, the Waggoner children turned their acreage over to professionals, moved away, and pursued flamboyance. In other words, they enjoyed the fruits of wealth, but not the hard work of ranching. Electra Waggoner became known for lavish spending, million-dollar shopping sprees, as one account put it. Guy Waggoner gained notoriety of a different sort, marrying a total of 8 times in his lifetime, which provides a hint of his personal turbulence. E. Paul Waggoner, to his credit, did involve himself in the horse operation, but he too had expensive tastes. Seeing his children's detachment and the potential for the ranch to splinter, Tom took decisive action. In 1923, he reunited all 4 divisions by creating the Tom Waggoner Estate, a single trust that placed all the land back under one umbrella. He effectively reversed the earlier gift and made himself the sole trustee in charge. The ranch became a Massachusetts business trust, a legal structure that would allow it to be managed as one entity even after Tom's death. His 3 children were named as beneficiaries and sat on the board, but Tom retained ironclad control as long as he lived. Tom died in 1934, leaving the ranch in the trust for his heirs. After his passing, the estate was to be managed for the benefit of all his descendants, who were equal beneficiaries. At first, this arrangement held the ranch together through mid-century. Decades went by and new generations were born. Electra Waggoner had married and became Electra Waggoner Wharton, having children of her own, including a daughter, Electra Waggoner Biggs, who interestingly became a nationally known sculptor. General Motors even named the Buick Electra automobile after her in 1959. E. Paul Waggoner also had children, one of whom was Helen Waggoner Biggs, later Helen Biggs Willingham. Guy Waggoner had 2 children, but in a twist, his side of the family sold their interests in the estate to their cousins in later years. By the late 1980s, the ownership of the Waggoner estate had consolidated into essentially 2 branches of the family. The descendants of Electra, notably her grandson A.B. Bucky Waggoner Jr., and the descendants of E. Paul, including Helen Elaine Biggs and her husband Gene Willingham. These 2 camps, cousins to each other, did not see eye to eye. The cracks in the family unity erupted into a legal war in the early 1990s. The core issue, whether to sell the Waggoner Ranch or keep it. The estate had grown extremely valuable on paper over the years, but it was locked in a trust that made it selling or dividing it difficult without unanimous agreement. Electra Waggoner Biggs, Electra's daughter, and her side apparently leaned towards selling the ranch and distributing the wealth, especially as they aged. On the other side, Bucky Waggoner, Electra's grandson, and the E. Paul branch wanted to keep the ranch in the family and continue operations.
By 1991, Electra Biggs moved to have the ranch sold and assets distributed, and Bucky opposed it. The dispute went to court, and it would drag on for over 20 years in Texas courts with an avalanche of suits and countersuits. It became one of the most protracted inheritance fights in Texas history. During these years, relations between the two family factions were icy. It's said that the respective family heads stopped speaking to each other entirely, communicating only via written memos even though their offices were across the hall from each other in Vernon, Texas. Meanwhile, offers from wealthy outsiders kept pouring in. Oil magnates, media moguls, billionaires from across the country showed interest in buying the renowned Waggoner Ranch. But no sale could be agreed. One, the heirs couldn't agree on a price or terms, and two, as former Texas Governor Rick Perry once observed, there was no single motivated seller since the heirs were deadlocked. The result was a stalemate. The ranch couldn't be sold, but neither could it move forward easily with improvements or major changes due to the internecine fighting. By around 2013, the situation reached a breaking point. With the estate's feuding beneficiaries unable to resolve things, the court considered a drastic solution: breaking up the ranch and auctioning it off in pieces. A court-appointed receiver drew up plans for a potential auction that would split the 510,000-acre estate into parcels, sell them to the highest bidders, and even separately auction off assets like the mineral rights, equipment, cattle herd, horse herd, and the Waggoner brand name itself. This was the nightmare scenario for anyone who loved the ranch, Texas's greatest contiguous ranch, dismembered and scattered to the winds. Longtime ranch brokers argued passionately against this outcome, believing that chopping up the ranch would destroy its historical identity and reduce its value. Fortunately, this dire breakup never came to pass. The pressure of the looming auction finally catalyzed a resolution. In 2014, the warring family members agreed to list the Waggoner Ranch intact to see if a buyer could be found who would meet their price. The asking price was eye-watering, $725 million, reflecting the ranch's vast land, 1,000-plus oil wells, cattle, horses, equipment, and even 41.67% of the mineral rights that would convey with the sale. It was essentially the largest ranch package ever put on the open market, and certainly one of the most expensive anywhere in the world. After some court-mandated steps, including a Texas Supreme Court ruling in 2015 that finally cleared the way to sell, a buyer emerged to make the deal of the century. In early 2016, the Waggoner Ranch was sold in its entirety to Stanley Kroenke, a billionaire businessman and rancher. Stan Kroenke is known for owning professional sports teams, like the Los Angeles Rams, and also for being one of the largest landowners in America. With the Waggoner acquisition, which reportedly closed for around $725 million, Kroenke suddenly jumped from the 9th to the 5th largest private landowner in the United States. For Texas, this sale was historic. It marked the first time the Waggoner Ranch left the family since its 19th century founding. It was also a relief to many because the buyer purchased the entire ranch intact, preserving it as one piece. The good news is that the massive ranch remained intact even though the family fell apart, one writer aptly noted. Local communities around the ranch had been on edge about the sale. Hundreds of people in nearby towns depend on the Waggoner for their livelihoods, as cowboys, ranch hands, oil field workers, and so on. Towns like Vernon and Electra, and even the city of Wichita Falls, which gets water from Waggoner's Lake Kemp, all have close ties to the ranch's operations. If a new owner slashed jobs or closed off access, it could hurt the whole region. Initially, there were fears, but in the years since 2016, the impact has largely been positive or neutral. Kroenke's organization pledged to continue running Waggoner as a working ranch and to respect its legacy. Indeed, day-to-day life on the ranch changed little for the roughly 100 employees who remained on staff. The cowboys still ride out to check cattle, The oil pump's still not up and down, and the rhythm of ranch work carries on. One change that did come under new ownership was environmental. The Kroenke team launched a holistic wildlife and habitat management program on the ranch, aiming to improve ranges for quail and deer.
They undertook extensive brush control on over 150,000 acres to revive native grasses and habitat diversity. This reflects Stan Kroenke's conservation-minded approach to his landholdings. Not every move was popular. Notably, the new owner ended a long-standing lake lease program that had allowed local families to maintain cabins on the shores of Lake Kemp and Lake Diversion, two lakes within the ranch. For decades, several hundred families had leased small lots by those lakes and built modest vacation homes there. In 2016, they were notified their leases would end and they had 5 months to vacate. Kroenke's intent was to let the lake shores return to a more natural state to benefit the ecosystem. While this caused some local heartbreak, recreational access to Lake Kemp itself remains available to the public for fishing and boating for a fee via a park area. Thus, after decades of turmoil, the Waggoner Ranch's future was secured under a new steward who has both the resources and the inclination to keep it intact. The deal of the century ensured that this legendary ranch would continue as one of the great ranches of Texas, rather than being broken into fragments. It was the end of an era of family ownership, but the beginning of a new chapter where the Waggoner legacy lives on, still strong, still vast, and still iconic.
Running a ranch the size of a small country is a monumental task. How is the Waggoner Ranch managed today, and what exactly goes on across those 525,000-plus acres on a daily basis? The answer is a mix of traditional ranching practices and modern efficiency, all aimed at maintaining the ranch's productivity in cattle, horses, farming, and oil. First, the sheer logistics. Waggoner Ranch is so large that it has historically been divided into multiple divisions, or camps, each with its own headquarters and crew. Back in the Waggoner family days, the ranch was grouped into 4 major divisions, some named for W.T.'s children's sections, Zacarioista, Santa Rosa, etc., with sub-camps under each. Today, under Kroenke ranches, the land is organized into about 13 camps or management units, each roughly 20,000 to 30,000 acres in size. Each camp has a manager or camp man and a set of cowboys, barns, pens, and sometimes housing for families. These camps operate semi-independently for routine matters. The camp crews take care of the cattle in their sector, maintain fences and water sources there, etc. However, they all come together as one outfit for big tasks, like spring branding and fall roundups or shipping. During those times, cowboys from all camps will converge, working communally to brand calves or herd cattle to shipping points. This team approach is vital to cover ground on a ranch this vast. In total, around 100 employees, give or take, work on the Waggoner Ranch, including cowboys, farmhands, mechanics, maintenance crews, and oil field workers. There is a main headquarters compound near Vernon, Texas, where the general manager's office and estate office are located, but much of the work happens out on the land at the camp headquarters. The current ranch manager, as of recent reports, is Sam Connolly of Bozeman, Montana, hired by Kroenke to oversee Waggoner and other ranches. He and the foreman orchestrate the complex dance of ranch operations. Cattle ranching at scale. At its heart, Waggoner is a cattle ranch, and a very large one at that. The ranch typically maintains a herd of about 10,000 mother cows or brood cows year-round. These cows are the core breeding stock. With bulls and calves included, the total number of cattle on the ranch can easily be over 20,000 head at certain times of year. The cattle herd is carefully managed for high-quality beef production. Historically, the Waggoners were known for their Hereford cattle. W.T. introduced Herefords in the 1890s, and by 1917 had transitioned the herd to predominantly Hereford, favoring their hardiness and good beef traits. Today, the herd is still Hereford-based, but crossbreeding is used to improve vigor. About 60% of the cows are straight Hereford, while the rest are Hereford crosses with Angus or Brahman influence, creating Angus Hereford and Brangus Hereford cows. These crossbreds can have better heat tolerance and mothering ability. The ranch uses purebred Hereford, Angus, and Charolais bulls to sire calves, a mix that yields calves suited for the market. Charolais and Angus bring good growth and meat qualities. Hereford adds hardiness. The breeding program's goal is a robust calf crop each year that will perform well either on feed or as replacement heifers. Managing 10,000 plus cattle spread over 500,000 acres means water and grass are of utmost importance. Waggoner Ranch has made itself largely self-sufficient in feed and water. About 26,000 acres of the ranch are cultivated farmland, mostly planted in wheat, hay grazer, and improved grasses. In winter, wheat fields provide green grazing for cattle, or wheat pasture, and in summer, hay grazer and coastal Bermuda grass fields are baled for hay. This means the ranch produces most of its own supplemental feed, hay and grain, to get cattle through winter or drought. The farming operation, or 25 to 30,000 acres, even yields surplus crops in good years that can be sold, adding income. In essence, Waggoner Ranch can feed its cattle without needing to buy a lot from outside, which is a huge cost saving. Water, as mentioned, is abundant in surface sources. The ranch is dotted with thousands of ponds or stock tanks, ensuring that no part of a pasture is far from water. Additionally, the ranch's two large lakes, Lake Kemp, or 16,540 acres, and Lake Diversion, provide ample water and backup storage. Lake Kemp in particular not only serves the ranch, but it's also a public recreation reservoir with fishing, boating, etc., and, as noted, supplies municipal water to Wichita Falls in dry times. Groundwater is limited in the area, as the old tale about striking oil instead of water suggests, so these ponds and lakes are lifelines. The ranch maintains windmills and solar pumps on wells where available, but primarily relies on those surface waters. During normal conditions, cattle can roam freely and always find a pond or creek in their vicinity. In drought, the ranch's water infrastructure is a critical safeguard. The daily work of cattle ranching on Waggoner Ranch involves the classic cowboy tasks: riding pastures to check the herd's health, moving cattle between pastures where rotational grazing is practiced to let grass recover, fixing fences, and doctoring any sick animals. Come spring, there are big branding gathers. Over 5,000 calves might need branding, vaccinating, and castrating in a season, which is a huge undertaking. All hands turn out for these events, often working from dawn to dusk. In the fall, roundup and shipping take place, where steer calves are gathered and sent to market or feedlots. Given the ranch's size, cattle work can sometimes mean long trail drives within the ranch. Cowboys might spend days moving a herd from a far pasture to the corrals. They'll camp out or use remote line camps when doing these long pushes. Modern technology aids the management too. They use radios, pickups, and even helicopters at times to survey herds or find stray cattle in rough country, though the Waggoner cowboys still prefer horseback for most tasks. The ranch maintains extensive roads. Literally thousands of miles of ranch roads and fence lines have to be maintained over that expanse. When you consider everything, fencing, water systems, vehicles, and so on, it's like operating a small infrastructure network dedicated solely to raising cattle. It's no wonder the sale listing touted the Waggoner as a turnkey operation, with all its rolling stock, equipment, and improvements included. Few buyers could step into such a massive operational ranch. It requires not just money, but expertise and a capable workforce, which, thankfully, Waggoner Ranch has. Alongside cattle, oil pumping is the other major operation on the ranch. The Waggoner Ranch lies atop several oil-bearing geologic formations. Since the first gusher in 1902, oil has been a staple of the ranch's income. Presently, about 160,000 acres of the ranch are proven productive oil properties. On those acres, as noted earlier, around 1,200 oil wells are actively producing, yielding roughly 40,000 barrels of oil per month on average. The oil wells are scattered mostly in the southern and western portions of the ranch. In the early days, W.T. ran his own small oil company and refinery. In modern times, the oil production has often been done through leases or partnerships with energy companies, but always under the oversight of the ranch's oil division. The Waggoner estate long had an oil division office that managed these wells and the associated infrastructure, pipelines, tank batteries, and pump jacks. According to an official statement before the sale, the Waggoner was seeking partners to help explore the remaining untapped acreage with new technology. Approximately 400,000 acres of ranch land hadn't been fully tested for oil and could hold more reserves. This hints at the significant potential still under Waggoner lands. The oil pumps require maintenance, and there is a dedicated team of oil field hands and pumpers on the ranch who check wells daily, keep the pumps running, and fix leaks or mechanical issues. You might see a cowboy riding one hill and in the distance an oil pump jack rhythmically nodding on another. It's a characteristic sight at Waggoner Ranch, illustrating the dual nature of its production. The revenue from oil can fluctuate with market prices, but it often rivals or exceeds the income from cattle. In essence, cows and crude oil together fuel the financial engine of Waggoner Ranch. This diversification is a big reason the ranch has remained viable for so long. During times when cattle prices are low, oil can carry the load, and vice versa. We've touched on farming as part of the cattle operation. The ranch farms around 25,000 to 30,000 acres in any given year. The majority is dryland farming, relying on rainfall with a small portion under irrigation by a few pivot systems. The main crops are winter wheat, planted in fall, grazed by cattle through winter, and then sometimes allowed to head out for grain harvest, and hay grazer or sorghum Sudan grass and coastal Bermuda grass for baling. These provide silage, hay, and grazing. The farming operation employs tractors, combines, balers, and all the typical agricultural machinery, with a crew that focuses on planting and harvesting.
Extra grain or hay can be sold if there's a surplus, but typically it's balanced to feed the ranch's own livestock. Beyond these, the Waggoner Ranch historically did not commercialize hunting or other businesses while under family ownership. In fact, remarkably, in over 165 years of family ownership, commercial hunting was never allowed on the ranch. This means, unlike many ranches that lease out deer or bird hunts, the Waggoners kept their land as a kind of private wildlife sanctuary. As a result, the property became a haven for wildlife, with dense populations of white-tailed deer, Rio Grande turkey, bobwhite quail, dove, ducks, and feral hogs. Some trophy white-tailed deer on Waggoner Ranch are of Boone and Crockett quality, and it's often said that many deer there may have never heard a rifle shot because of the long ban on hunting. This lack of hunting pressure, combined with extensive habitat, made Waggoner's wildlife truly exceptional. Now that the ranch is under new ownership, there have been moves to carefully introduce hunting and recreation in a controlled manner. The ranch's official communications mention developing hunting opportunities for quail, wild hog, and deer. It's a logical step. Done responsibly, wildlife management and limited hunting can provide additional income and help control species like feral hogs, which can be pests. Already, Lake Kemp on the ranch has an established recreational area, Carablanca Park, for public fishing and boating. One can imagine guided hunts or wildlife tours could be offered in the future, turning Waggoner into not just a working ranch, but also a sportsman's paradise, which it is naturally suited to be. Speaking of nature, the landscape of Waggoner Ranch is diverse and stunning. Traversing its nearly 800 square miles, you encounter a variety of Texas terrains: rolling prairies, rough canyons, wooded creek bottoms, and red clay hills. In the north and east, there are relatively level plains and gently rolling fields. This is where large wheat fields and pastures dominate. As you go southwest toward Ford and Knox counties, the land gets more rugged with eroded red earth breaks and mesas that are quite scenic. Mesquite brush is common throughout, and the ranch has ongoing mesquite control programs to keep it from overtaking the grass. In creek bottoms, you'll find taller trees like hackberry, soapberry, and wild plum, as well as thickets of salt cedar along streams. The Salt Fork of the Red River touches the ranch's northern boundary, and other creeks like Beaver Creek and the Wichita River wind through sections, creating ribbons of green habitat that wildlife love. With an average rainfall of about 26 to 28 inches per year in that region, the ranch supports a mix of native grasses, blue stems, grommas, switchgrass, and some introduced grasses in former pastures. The variety of land and cover means you can find everything from open range where antelope might feel at home — historically, pronghorn antelope did roam these parts — to dense brush that can hide trophy bucks. Truly, the Waggoner has a bit of every kind of North Texas landscape within its fences.
One of the most captivating aspects of Waggoner Ranch is its rich wildlife and relatively untouched habitat. As noted, the Waggoner's policy against commercial hunting for over a century inadvertently created a de facto wildlife refuge. Generations of deer and other game lived with minimal hunting pressure. Only occasional personal hunting by family or friends was allowed. The result by the 21st century was an ecosystem teeming with life. White-tailed deer are plentiful and have been able to grow old and large. It's said some bucks on the ranch could rank high in the record books due to their age and genetics. Wild turkeys flourish along the creeks. Bobwhite quail, which have declined in many parts of the South, continue to find suitable habitat in Waggoner's mix of grassy range and brushy cover. The ranch is home to doves and waterfowl that flock to its numerous ponds and lakes, as well as feral hogs that root in its fields and thickets. Coyotes, bobcats, and the occasional mountain lion patrol the food chain as predators. Smaller creatures like jackrabbits, armadillos, raccoons, and rattlesnakes are of course part of the tableau too. It is Texas ranch land after all. Under Kroenke's ownership, a dedicated wildlife division was established to enhance and protect these natural resources. Their focus has been particularly on upland bird habitat, quail, and white-tailed deer. Brush management, primarily clearing invasive mesquite and cedar in select areas, has been done on over 150,000 acres of the ranch since 2016 to encourage the growth of native grasses and forbs that benefit quail and other wildlife. By thinning the thick brush in some parts, they create a better mosaic of cover and open feeding areas, which is ideal for quail. On the flip side, they leave plenty of dense cover intact in other areas, especially along creek bottoms and in rough country, to ensure deer and other animals have sanctuary areas. The ranch has also planted food plots in certain locations. These are small cultivated fields with forage crops like winterweed, oats, or sorghum left unharvested so that wildlife can graze them. According to the sale brochure, these food plots act as, quote, a magnet for wildlife, helping support robust game populations. With such measures, the Waggoner is poised to remain a, quote, sportsman's paradise in potential, whether or not it is extensively hunted. Lakes and water bodies on the ranch also contribute to the biodiversity. Lake Kemp, being 16,000 plus acres, attracts migratory birds and offers a fishery for species like bass, catfish, and crappie. In fact, local anglers consider it a great spot for sand bass runs and catfishing. The smaller lake diversion built as a holding reservoir below Lake Kemp and countless ponds mean even dry corners of the ranch have watering holes that wildlife frequent. The presence of water in a sometimes drought-prone region is key to sustaining the wild fauna through harsh summers. In essence, Waggoner Ranch's vastness allowed an entire ecosystem to thrive relatively undisturbed by development. No highways or major power lines cut through to fragment wildlife corridors. No cities or subdivisions encroach on its boundaries. It's a rare thing in today's world for an area so large to remain largely wild and intact. The new owners appear committed to responsible stewardship of this natural treasure. Stan Kroenke himself said upon purchase, "We will continue to preserve and protect this uniquely American treasure, emphasizing conservation." The family was assured that Kroenke ranches would carry on the, quote, Waggoner way of life, which means a balance of profitable ranching and land conservation.